This week,
all public money for education should go to public schools, not private schools.
The state Supreme Court will decide whether Mississippi can grant federal ARPA funding to private schools. Meantime, the U.S. Supreme Court could decide soon whether some states may keep Donald Trump's name off the 2024 presidential ballot. Legal analyst Matt Steffey joins us to break down these two key court cases. Also, the Division of Medicaid's chief talks with reporters about rising state costs for the important health coverage program. And we'll look under the hood of online sports betting as Mississippi lawmakers consider a new legalization effort. That's all ahead this Sunday on Mississippi Insight. I'm Byron Brown. Thanks for joining us for this February 11th edition of Mississippi Insight. Some important court cases came up in the last week at the state and federal levels. So we thought it high time to invite back one of Mississippi's leading experts on legal and constitutional affairs, Matt Steffey. He teaches at the Mississippi College School of Law in Jackson. He joins us today by Zoom. Matt, welcome back to Mississippi Insight.
Thanks for having me, Byron.
Let's look first at the private school funding case before the state Supreme Court. Lawmakers in 2022, they established a grant program for private school infrastructure. It's funded by $10 million in federal ARPA money. A Hinds County Chancery judge blocked the program later that year. Now state justices will decide whether to allow it. Matt, what is at the constitutional heart of this case?
The constitutional heart of this case is Section 208 of the Mississippi Constitution. This is at this point strictly a state law issue, and it involves that provision of the state constitution. It's quite brief, that says, nor shall any funds be appropriated to any school that at the time of receiving the appropriation is not conducted as a free school. So it seems to prohibit public money going to private schools. The state has made two arguments to try to distinguish the program, these particular funds, saying that the funds aren't really appropriated because they're not coming out of the legislative budget, and more particularly, they're not appropriated because they weren't earmarked for public schools. That's hard to mesh with the constitutional text. I think that's why Judge Wise decided what she did. It doesn't say appropriated from the general fund. It doesn't say funds that would otherwise go to public schools. It says, nor shall any funds be appropriated. And appropriation seems to be synonymous in the state constitution with spending money. I mean, heck, levy boards in the state constitution make appropriations. Property, real property, is appropriated. It seems to mean spending. And there's no doubt that that these are funds being spent by the state legislature. Now, they go through an intermediary administrative agency, but lots and lots of funds go through an intermediary. The legislature doesn't have a cash window like a casino where it hands money directly to recipients. So, these are the arguments I too would make on behalf of the state, but I think that's an uphill battle. The other argument made by the state is that the people bringing this lawsuit, bringing this challenge, don't have standing because they weren't harmed. They can't show that public school students would have gotten any more money. They can't show that this federal grant money would have found its way to them. The legal difficulty with that argument is that Mississippi, unlike federal courts, have very liberal standing rules. The court has said over and over that standing rules in the state are liberal. If the Mississippi Supreme Court sides with the state, allows this money to go to the private schools, however, standing is a attractive way to reach that outcome. It's a way to just say these weren't the right people, bring in the right case, rather than trying to say that this spending wasn't an appropriation within the meaning of the Constitution.
When you say advocates for public schools, they insist that borrowing public funds for private schools is an ironclad principle without exceptions. Are they right there or are they not?
Well, they're certainly right according to the constitutional text, which is why the state tries to justify it by saying, well, it's not an appropriation from the general fund. There's no limit. There's no words about general fund that appear in the Constitution, or that it didn't go directly from the legislature to the recipient. There's nothing unusual about that. Perhaps their chief argument is this isn't state money because it's a federal block grant. But it would seem that the spirit and the text of the constitutional rule say that the legislature can't make choices to spend the money it has to spend on private schools.
The state attorney general is arguing in favor of the funding. Lynn Fitch's office says that public schools have enjoyed a lopsided benefit from federal pandemic relief funding. Do you believe that the justices will find that a persuasive argument?
Well, the politics of it are clear. That the attorney general's lined up with this. The state legislature approves of this. The state legislature normally fares fairly well in the Supreme Court. So one could see the court reaching that outcome. Again, it's hard to square with the text. And after all, if the federal government wanted to appropriate pandemic relief to private schools, it could easily do so directly. But it gave that money to the state, and the state constitution, not public policy, not federal policy, is what stands in the way here.
Let's move on to the U.S. Supreme Court now. Justices there seem poised to reject attempts to kick former President Donald Trump off the 2024 ballot. Conservative and liberal justices appeared last week to be in agreement in a case that would largely end efforts in Colorado, Maine, and elsewhere to prevent Trump's qualification. What do you make of this case?
Well, this is kind of like the ghost of Bush versus Gore. There is where the Supreme Court intervened at the end of the election process to try to bring some kind of order to the outcome. This is is reincarnated at the beginning of the process. I listened. I read the text of that oral argument, and the lawyers representing Colorado got it from every quarter, as you indicated. That it seems that across the ideological spectrum, the Supreme Court is wary at giving this authority to the states. Because as we know, it's not going to be just cabin to Colorado and this election. It will become another battleground. The one thing I found interesting, though, was the court seemed alarmed at the prospect that a few states might turn the outcome, might in turn decide the outcome of a presidential election. A few states always decide the outcome of a presidential election because of the odd quirks of the historical relic that is the Electoral College. Most of the states are non-competitive, and a few Midwestern states or a few other scattered states decide the outcome. This would just be in state courts as opposed to the ballot box, and that is a move that one can understand the Supreme Court being reticent about. Congress, of course, could step in and pass a statute that defines how this process would work. It hasn't done so. Congress has the ability to remove disabilities from office, but that takes a 2/3 vote. So it's not quite clear how this mechanism would ever be enforced if the states don't do it. But the states doing it seems to be an idea inconsistent with the basic idea of federalism. That is, that federal elections are run by federal rules, not by state rules.
There's some thought that Trump's attorneys may seek a hold on this election interference case while he appeals a lower court's findings that he is not immune to criminal charges. Do you think Trump has a chance to overturn those rulings and win effective immunity from prosecution?
I think that's a real long shot. This is again has some historical antecedents. Richard Nixon made that argument; it never made its way into court. Bill Clinton made an argument that the president enjoys this broad-based immunity. That was rejected. I think the Supreme Court is going to be reluctant to put the president literally above the law, to say the president can break the law, including the criminal law, without consequence. So I think that's an uphill battle. I believe the Supreme Court would like to stay out of it. And as long as there's no disagreement among the federal courts, it really may choose to do so.
Matt Steffey, thanks again for joining us for Mississippi Insight and your insight this morning.
Thanks for having me.
You'll hear more from State Medicaid Chief Zach Snyder when Mississippi Insight continues. Mississippi's Division of Medicaid is asking for a roughly 9% increase in state support. That amounts to an extra $83 million for the next fiscal year. Medicaid Executive Director Drew Snyder told the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee Wednesday that cuts in federal matching funds are driving the request. Snyder is a regular visitor to the legislative briefings, but he rarely speaks directly with reporters. 12 News' Richard Lake was among the journalists who caught up with him Wednesday.
I think what I said this morning was that there was a 42% increase in the non-federal share burden for the state. So instead of paying 16 cents for every $1 of Medicaid services, we'll be in FY25. We'll be paying 23 cents. So that creates a big change. And when you look at the numbers and you're spending around $6 billion when it's matched when you've got to put in 16% of $6.5 billion versus 23, I mean, you're going to see some big changes. We have a cash balance that we're going to spend that down over the next 2 years. That's going to probably be exhausted by the end of state fiscal year 2025, and then that's when we'll really see that big increase. I think right now we're in a situation where it's really kind of a correction that we're 11% under state support than we were from our peak in 2016. So a lot of this is really just a readjustment. We're seeing some of the increases in state support that are consistent with what some of the increases that we've been seeing in the total spending in the program. And I think some of the additional costs are not really uncommon. We're seeing some pretty large deficits in some other states, and as this federal share has declined, it's really going to put a lot of pressure on state Medicaid budgets in other states and here in Mississippi as well.
Are there any fears that the state might not be able to afford those skyrocketing prices when it comes around?
Sustainability for the Medicaid program has always been a concern. It's been a concern since it was created in 1969. Look, I think it's a delicate balancing act. We've got to make sure that we continue to build on the positive momentum in the program and support the Medicaid program while making sure that we're controlling costs for taxpayers and not crowding out resources for other core functions of government like education and public safety.
And is the 16 to 23 cents, that's just based off us losing the 6.2% FMAP increase, right?
It's primarily based on losing the 6.2 percentage point FMAP increase, but the regular FMAP has also been going down over the last couple of years.
You said that this is not uncommon, that other states are seeing massive increases in the cost of their Medicaid programs as well?
Yes.
Is there anything you can speak on just this new legislative session and the political wins that are going around this year? We've seen an increase in presumptive eligibility past the House. We saw what happened last year with expanding postpartum care. Political wins are obviously at least leaning into a more of state funding and into some welfare here in the state. What do you make of just more expansion talk as it ramps up?
Well, look, I think when it comes to eligibility, that is, those are decisions that our elected officials are entrusted to make. And the one thing that's been constant about the Medicaid program over the last 50 years is that there's a lot of change. So, I think what Medicaid looked like 5 years ago, it may look different 5 years from now. So, I'm not going to really opine on a lot of those things. We're going to implement what the legislature decides to do and try to do that effectively and efficiently and help continue to build on the positive momentum in Medicaid.
Yeah, where do you see the impact on the hospital spending of that extra 600 million? Was it right? They're getting through those, the extra federal money and the increase in bed taxes paying the state portion.
Yeah, look, it's a really transformational change for the hospital industry, and I think hopefully it will really help preserve access to care. And we're really thrilled that we got the CMS approval for it in December.
A bill advancing in Mississippi's legislature would legalize online sports betting in the state. A House committee advanced the legislation a couple of weeks ago. The Mississippi Mobile Sports Wagering Act would legalize mobile betting while requiring gambling companies to contract with brick-and-mortar gambling establishments. Recently, the nonprofit news group Sideline briefed reporters on online betting and its impact were legal in other states. Here's part of that briefing, led here by Dr. Shane Krause, director of the Behavioral Addictions Lab at the University of Nevada in Las Vegas.
Sports betting history has kind of evolved. So originally, sports betting was previously illegal under the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act in 1992. However, Delaware and Montana, Nevada, and Oregon had pre-existing sports lotteries that were allowed to kind of be exempt for sports betting. However, in 2018, so about 6 years ago, the Supreme Court in Murphy and National Collegiate Athletic Association struck down this law in allowing states to legalize sports betting. And since that, we've really had a really huge proliferation of sports wagering and sports betting throughout the country, which we'll talk about. But just to give you an idea of scope of how big we're talking, in 6 years, over $306 billion has been handled, 25.3 billion in gross revenue, 4.5 billion in taxes has been generated so far. Again, and I think 2024 is going to be even a bigger year than the prior years. Nevada alone is a big state for sports wagering as well. We have in 6 years as well, we've handled almost 37 billion. 2.1 billion in gross revenue and 142 million. Super Bowl last year in 2023, which was very big. Nevada alone handled through our casino sports books here $150 million was wagered for one game. I think that's going to be much higher now that we have the Super Bowl here in Vegas. So this is the map of the current regulation. So what you're seeing is there's 38 that are red. Those are states that have legal sports wagering or gambling in some capacity. Here there are 4 states that are kind of this odd, I'm not sure, brownish color. That is where we have 4 states that are in the process of trying to legalize it, and then we have 7 states that where in a sense it's not going to happen, or currently there's no legislation, and 1 that is not moving forward. So you can really see we went from 4 that were kind of a small time to really proliferation, and this will continue to spread. So the question that we always get is who bets on sports? And I think this is an evolving question. I would say that this is kind of what research and some of our research in this lab is also finding. But generally from a recent survey from last year, they found that when we look at those who are sports bettors, they're predominantly male, they're a little more likely to be white, have higher income and under 35. Again, I think as more and more people are engaging in sports wagering, I think these demographics will be shifting, and we really want to be kind of evolving our understanding. But the question is also, 84% of them are actually reported being a sports fan. 67% actually went to a live sporting event in the past year. 62% participate in fantasy football league or sports leagues. These are things where people get together teams and they create fantasy, or in a sense, not real teams, but they use players in the league, and you can gamble and wager money through them as well. And then 41% watch esports, and this is like video games and betting on video games. So this just came out. So it's expected that about, almost really 29 million people will intend to place an online wager for this year in Super Bowl. So I think that is definitely, I think that's an increase and reflecting of the popularity of this. One of the things that we need to be having a conversation, I know Dr. Tenzo will speak more to this, is that what about problematic sports wagering? And really there's not a lot of research yet. It's an evolving area. But a couple things that we know from the work we've done is that worldwide research generally suggests that sports betting is associated with elevated risk for problem gambling across, and this is across countries and languages and cultures. Our work that we've done here recently is esports wagering, daily fantasy football, and general sports wagering are generally associated with more problem gambling or higher severity compared to those without. We're also seeing more heavier substance use among those who engage in sports betting compared to those who do not, which has its own risk factors, as we'll hear soon. And again, people who really bet. So the takeaway here is people who bet on who gamble on sports, I think, might be a higher risk category. But it's really important to look at two things. It's people who bet more frequently in sports and also bet on two or more sports. So as people bet on more sports across different sports, the risk for problem gambling is shown to increase.
That's Dr. Shane Krause from the University of Nevada in Las Vegas on the impact of online sports betting. We'll keep you updated on the Mississippi House bill, how it fares in the Senate. We're back in a moment. Big thanks to Professor Matt Steffey for joining us this week. We're back next weekend with more of the political and current affairs coverage that you demand. I'm Byron Brown from all of us here at 12 News. Make it a great weekend.